Hello, we are reading The Eagle by Rosemary Sutcliff. We are in chapter 9. The last chapter, Marcus got basically surgery to fix his leg. So we're going to do a little bit of a time skip here. It's actually 8 months later, which you'll discover here shortly. Okay, Tribune Placidus, chapter 9. A mile or two south of Caliva, where the forest opened suddenly to a steep drop of bracken-clad hillside, two men were standing, a Roman, Marcus, and a Briton, Esca, and between them, head up and muzzle quivering into the wind, a young brindled wolf. Abruptly, the Roman stooped to unbuckle the heavy bronze-studded collar from the wolf's neck. Cub was full-grown now, though not yet come to his full strength, and the time had arrived when he must have his choice of returning to the wild. You could tame a wild thing, but never count it as truly one until, being free to return to its own kind, it chose to come back to you. Marcus had known that all along, and he and Esca had made their preparations with infinite care, bringing Cub to this spot again and again, that he might be sure of his way home if he wished to take it. With his fingers on the buckle, Marcus wondered whether he would ever feel the hairy living warmth of Cub's neck again. The collar was off now, and he thrust it into the breast of his tunic. For a lingering moment he fondled the pricked ears. Then he stood erect. "Go free, brother. Good hunting." Cub looked up into his face, puzzled. Then, as a fresh burst of woodland smells reached his quivering nose, trotted off down the wood shore. The other two watched him go in silence, a brindled shadow slipping away into the undergrowth. Then Marcus turned and made for the trunk of a fallen birch tree a little way down the slope, moving quickly but awkwardly over the rough ground with a sideways lurch of the shoulders at every step. Rufrius Galerius had done his work well, and now, some 8 months later, Marcus was, to all intents and purposes, as sound as ever, just as the surgeon had promised. He would carry the scars to his dying day, and a twisted leg that would bar him from the legions. That's sad. But that was all. Indeed, after a winter spent with Esca's help in training as though for the arena, he was now as hard as a gladiator. He reached the fallen tree trunk and sat down on it, and an instant later Esca was squatting at his feet. This was a favorite vantage point of theirs. The tree trunk made a convenient seat, and the steep drop of the hillside gave a clear view of wooded hills and the blue lift of the downs beyond. He had seen these rolling woods in their winter bareness, dappled like a partridge's breast. He had seen the first outbreaking of the blackthorn foam, and now the full green flame of spring was running through the forest, and the wild cherry trees stood like lit candles along the woodland ways. A lot of figurative language here. The green flame of spring, that's a metaphor comparing, all the outbursting and growth of greenery in the springtime, comparing that to flame directly without using like or as. And then, the wild cherry trees stood like lit candles. That would be a simile. The two in their vantage point sat talking lazily with long silences between, of many things under the sun, including the guest whom Uncle Aquila was expecting that evening, no less a person than the legate of the 6th Legion on his way down from Iberacum to Regnum and thence to Rome. Okay, so an old friend of Uncle Aquila's is coming. He is the legate of the 6th Legion, which means he is in charge of the whole thing. And even in like a province, if there's only one legion in that province, if it's a Roman province, he's also in charge of that province. So he kind of controls everything that has to do with that legion. So he's pretty high up there. He is a very old friend of your uncle's? Asked Esca idly. Yes, I believe they served together in Judea when my uncle was first cohort. Judea would be Israel. When my uncle was first cohort of the remember, first cohort means he's in charge of the cohort, which is like 500 or 600. That's the first one in the legion, so he's kind of second in command of the legion. Of the Fretensis, and this man was doing his year as a tribune on the staff. He must be a great deal younger than Uncle Aquila. And now he goes home to his own place? Yes, but only on some business with the Senate, Uncle Aquila says, then back to the Eagles again. After a time they fell silent altogether, each busy with his own thoughts. Marcus's were mainly concerned, as they had been for some time past, with the question of what he was going to do with himself and his life now that he was well again. The legions were closed to him. Remember, he can't go back to be Legion, cohort commander or anything because of his leg. And that left just one other way of life that he would have turned to as a bird flies home. Farming was in the blood of most of his race, from the senator with his estate in the Alban Hills to the time-expired legionary with his pumpkin patch, and to Marcus, born and bred as he had been. Farming and soldiering were yoke mates, the two natural ways of life. But to start anything of that sort, one needed money. It was all right for the time-expired legionary with his government grant of land. It would have been all right for Marcus if he had served his 20 years, even though he never became prefect of an Egyptian legion, and had savings from his pay and a centurion's gratuity behind him. But as it was, he had nothing. He might have turned to Uncle Aquila for help, he knew, but he would not do that. His uncle, although he had sufficient for his needs, was not a rich man, and had done enough for him already. So if you think to have a farm, you need to have money to buy land in order to farm on the land, right? And he was thinking that he would spend his life in the military and then save up and do that when he retired. But now he doesn't have that. He should have set about finding some way to earn his living before now, he supposed, but there were so few ways open to a free man, and the frightful conviction was growing on him that he would end up as somebody's secretary. There were people who preferred a free secretary to a slave here, or even at home in Etruria, but even as that thought touched his mind, he knew that for him to drift home, rootless, and without any stake in the country that had bred him, nor any hope of such, would be only the shadow and none of the substance of homecoming. He would have carried his exile with him into his own hills and spoiled them, and that was all. No, he must look for his secretaryship here in Britain. Only this morning he had made up his mind to lay the secretary idea before Uncle Aquila tonight, but the legion's message had arrived, and now of course it would have to wait until the sudden guest had gone on his way. And part of him, a part of which he was rather ashamed, caught at the delay as a breathing space, one day's grace in which something might happen, though what was likely to happen he would have been hard to put it to say. So it's interesting here, and the book's giving us a little bit of foreshadowing. He's like, the only option I really have is to become a secretary and apply for a job that way. But someone's coming tonight, and he's like kind of looking forward to having, a break from having to kind of approach that thing that he needs to. But he's also part of like, well, maybe something's going to happen tonight. We'll see. Excuse me. In their silence, the wild had drawn close in to the two in the vantage point. Presently, a red glint slipping through the uncurling bracken and young foxgloves at the lower end of the clearing told them where a vixen passed. Remember, a vixen is a fox. She paused an instant in full view, her pointed muzzle raised, the sun shining with almost metallic luster on her coat. Then she turned in among the trees, and watching the russet glint in her flicker out of sight, Marcus found himself thinking of Katya. The closer friendliness between their house and his dad and his had continued. He knew Kaiso quite well now, and even Valaria a little. Valaria, plumpish and prettyish and foolish, floating with pale-colored mist linen, clanking with bracelets, her hair closely curled as a ram's fleece. He was forever meeting her in her litter as he came and went about Kaliva to the baths or the gymnasium or the Golden Vine, from whose stables he and Eska had lately hired ponies once or twice for a trip into the outback, and always he had to stop and talk. But of Katya herself he suddenly realized he had seen less and less as the months went by. With life opening to him again, he had had less need of her, and she had drawn back little by little without a shadow of reproach. Remember, reproach is to correct someone or say, you should do better. So she hasn't done any of that, even though he's seen her less and less. Yet he did not feel in the least guilty, and all at once, realizing how very easily Katya could have made him feel guilty if she had chosen to, he felt a quick rush of warmth toward her. The odd thing was that now he came to think of it, he did need Katya as much as ever. He often forgot her altogether with the surface of his mind, but he knew that if he were never to see her again, he would be very unhappy, perhaps as unhappy as if Cub never came back, And would Cub ever come back? Would the call of his own kind prove stronger than the tie that bound him to his master? Either way, Marcus hoped that it would be quick and easy and final, no tearing of the heart in two for Cub. He stirred and looked down at Eska. We have been roosting here too long enough. The other tipped back his head, and for a moment their eyes met. Then Eska got up and reached a helping hand to Marcus. Let the centurion whistle once in case he is near, then we will go home. I forgot to do it in Eska's voice. Marcus gave the shrill, broken whistle as he had always used to summon Cub, and stood listening. A magpie, startled by the sound, scolded sharply from the woods behind them, and nothing more. After a few moments he whistled again, still no answering bark, no brindled shape trotting out of the wood shore. He is out of hearing, said Eska. Well, he knows the way home, and there will be no harm to come to him. Now there would be no harm come to Cub. He was well known in and around Kaliva, and since he had long since lost his wolf smell, the dog pack accepted him for one of themselves, and one to be respected. No harm would come to him from his own kind either, for save when man took a hand, there was little war between wolf pack and dog pack, who indeed mated together often enough to make it sometimes hard to tell which was which. Only if he went back to his own kind, the day might come when men would hunt Cub as they hunted his mother. Marcus longed to look back once as they turned in among the hazel scrub of the forest verge, in case, even now, Cub might be coming uphill at a canter. But looking back was not in the bargain, and with his slave beside him, he turned resolutely homeward. They came to the south gate of Kaliva and passed through, Eska immediately following the usual 3 paces to the rear. They made their way round by the short cut behind the temple of Sol Minerva, and entered the house by the nearest door, which gave on to the slave quarters and the garden. Cub, if he came at all, would likely come over the old earthworks at the foot of the garden, for he was used to that road. But Marcus had had word with the city gatekeepers in case he came the other way. He reached the courtyard without meeting anyone, and while Eska went to set out a fresh tunic for his master, Marcus turned off along the colonnade toward the atrium. As he neared the doorway, a strange voice sounded behind it. A guest. The guest had already arrived then. "You are sure," said the voice, a harsh, clipped voice, but pleasant. "It would be a simple matter to send him up to the transit camp." And Uncle Aquila's voice replied, "When I have not the space to lodge 2 guests at the same time, I will tell you. You are a fool, Claudius." There were 2 strangers in the long room with Uncle Aquila, both in uniform, one resplendent under his coating of dust in the gilded bronze of a legate. That's Uncle Aquila's friend. The other, so there's someone else besides just his friend. The other standing a little behind him, evidently a staff officer. It seemed that they had only just arrived, for they had done no more than lay aside cloak and crested helmet. That much Marcus saw as he hesitated an instant on the threshold before his uncle looked round and saw him. "Ah, you are back, Marcus," said Uncle Aquila, and then, as he came forward to join the group, "Claudius, I present to you my nephew Marcus. Marcus, this is my very old friend, Claudius Hieronymus, legate of the 6th Legion." Marcus raised his hand in salute to his uncle's friend, and found himself looking into a pair of long, jet-black eyes that seemed to have the sun behind them. The legate was an Egyptian, and, he judged, of the old strain, for there was none of the Syrian softness in his face that he had seen so often in the faces of the men of the Nile. "I am very much honored to meet the legate of..." "Oh, this is Marcus. I am very much honored to meet the legate of Victrix," he said. The legate's face crinkled into a smile, then sent 1,000 fine lines deepening around his mouth and eyes. "And I am very glad to meet a kinsman of my ancient friend, all the more so because until today he might have been hatched out of a turtle's egg in the sand for all the kith and kin that he had to my knowledge." He indicated his companion. "I make known to you Tribune Servius Placidus of my staff." Marcus turned to the young officer and instantly became painfully conscious of his twisted leg. Once or twice before he had met people who made him feel like that, and he did not find that it endeared them to him. The 2 greeted each other as custom demanded, but without warmth. The staff officer was about Marcus's own age, an extremely beautiful young man with the graceful carriage, the oval face, and clustering hair that suggested Athenian ancestry. Smooth as a girl, Marcus thought with quick dislike, and the phrase seemed vaguely familiar. So did the name Placidus, for that matter. But it was a common enough name, and anyhow, this was no time to be trailing Marshlight's memories. Marcus supposed that until the guests went To wash off the dust of the journey, it was for him to hold the Tribune in conversation, leaving Uncle Aquila free to talk to his old friend. Marsipor had brought in wine for the travelers, and when it had been poured, the two young men turned from their elders and drifted over to a sunlit window. For a while they made casual small talk to each other, but as the moments went by, Marcus found it harder and harder to think of anything to say, while the Tribune appeared to have been born bored. At last Marcus, at his wit's end for another word, asked, "You returned to Rome with the legate, or only as far as Regnum?" "Oh, to Rome. Praise be to Bacchus. I am done with Britain once and for all when I board the galley in 2 days' time." "You have not, I take it, found Britain much to your taste?" The other shrugged and took a gulp of his wine. "The girls are well enough, and he's not British, but the girls are well enough, and the hunting. For the rest, Roma Dei, I can bear to leave it behind me." A doubt seemed to strike him. "You are not native-born to this benighted province?" "No," Marcus said, "I am not native-born." And then, feeling that he had been over-abrupt, he added, "Indeed, I have been out less than 3 years." "What possessed you to come at all? You must have found the long journey very trying." There was nothing so very much in the words, but the tone in which they were spoken made Marcus, who was rather on edge because of Cub, feel his hackles rising. "I came out to join my legion," he said coldly. "Oh," Placidus was slightly put out. "A wound, then?" "Yes." "I do not think I have ever met you in the Tribune's club at home." "It would be strange if you had. I was a mere cohort centurion." So he's adding in here, like, I was lead of a whole cohort. It would have been strange if you, just to, you down here, would have interacted with me who was up here. Marcus smiled, but all the contempt that the professional soldier could feel for the aristocrat playing at soldiers for a year was politely but thinly veiled behind his quiet words. Placidus flushed a little. "Really? Do you know, I should scarce have guessed it." He returned the thrust with the silken suggestion in his tone that really Marcus seemed almost civilized. "Do I salute a brother of the Victrix, or was it Capricorn or the changing boar with you?" Before Marcus could answer, a low chuckle came from the legate, whose back was toward them. "For one who considers himself, I believe not without the right, a somewhat skilled hunter, you can be singularly unobservant of small things, my Placidus," he said over his shoulder. "I have mentioned the fact to you before. You will find the signum of his legion at his left wrist." And he returned to his conversation with Uncle Aquila. At his words, something had clicked in Marcus's mind, and as the Tribune's glance jerked down to the heavy gold bracelet that he always wore, he remembered. "Smooth as a girl, but a skilled hunter," Esca had said, and the name had been Placidus. His mouth felt dry with disgust, and the flicker of discomfiture, yes, and something very like envy, that showed for an instant in the other's face gave him a quick satisfaction that was on Esca's account, rather than his own. So he's remembering that Esca had told a story of a fellow hunter named Placidus that had kind of berated Esca for being out here on the hunt as a slave and for trying to capture a cub, to calling him silly. So he's remembering this story finally. At first he's like, it seemed familiar, but he couldn't put his finger on it. And also, if you remember, on his left wrist is I don't remember exactly what it is, the congratulations for doing a really brave job for his legion. And, it's something that he always wears. It's kind of like, wearing a gold medal like we would today in the military of showing for your bravery. So Placidus looks at it and he's kind of his disgust, but also a little bit of envy that Marcus sees in his eyes. Placidus recovered himself at once and looked up with his faintly supercilious air. "See what it is to serve under a legate renowned for his appreciation of his junior officers," he murmured. "My dear Marcus, I do congratulate—" His eyes widened suddenly, and the soft, drawling voice sharpened into life. "Roma Dei, a wolf!" Before the words were out, Marcus had swung round. There in the colonnade doorway stood a brindled shape, savage head alertly raised, and eyes wary of the strangers within, whose unfamiliar scent had halted him on the threshold. "Cub!" Marcus called. "Cub!" and crouched down as, with a joyful bark, the brindled shape hurled itself upon him, fawning against his breast and singing as a croc sings in the boil. Cub's flanks were heaving with the speed that he had made to find his master, and he was frantically apologetic for having somehow lost him. And Marcus caught the great head of his hands, rubbing his thumbs into hollows behind the pricked ears. "So you have come back, brother," he said. "You have come back, cub." "Aw." "It is a wolf. It really is a wolf, and the brute behaving like a puppy," said Placidus in tones of disgusted unbelief above him. It seems we are witnesses to a reunion. Surely we have come in a happy hour," said the legate. I like him. Marcus freed himself from Cub's embraces and got to his feet. "A reunion, yes, you could call it so," he said. Then Cub did a thing that he had never done before. He thrust his lowered head between Marcus's knees, as a dog will sometimes do with someone he perfectly trusts, and stood there contentedly in one position in which he was utterly defenseless and at his master's mercy. And while he stood like that, with slowly swinging tail, Marcus brought out the bronze-studded collar from the breast of his tunic and bent to put it round his neck again. "How long have you had him?" Placidus asked, watching with a gleam of interest. As his collar safely buckled on again, the young wolf shook himself violently and sat down with lolling tongue and eyes half closed, propped against his master's leg. "Since he was a very small cub, more than a year ago," Marcus said, fondling a twitching ear. "Then, if I am not mistaken, I saw him taken from the lair after his dame was killed, his mom. The painted barbarian who fetched him out claimed to be a slave to a Marcus Aquila. I remember now." "You are not mistaken," Marcus said quietly. "The painted barbarian told me that story." Rather fortunately, Stephanos appeared at that moment, hovering in the doorway, and Uncle Aquila took the legate's empty wine cup from him. "You'll be wishing to soak off the dust of the road," he said. "We may live in the world's end, but the bath-water could not be hotter in Rome itself. Your own slaves will be waiting you in your quarters, no doubt. That is so, Stephanos? Good. I look forward to our next meeting at dinner."